Welcome back to my channel, where real story takes its time. Let's get into it.
I paid my sister's rent for 3 years without ever asking for a thing. But when I was in the hospital, she didn't come when I asked for help. She was grilling steaks in the backyard with our parents. No one arrived. I didn't argue. I shut everything down. 2 days later, my phone exploded. I used to think I was a generous person. Music. The kind of person you could count on when things got bad. The kind of person who wouldn't hesitate to wire money at 200 a.m. if you were in trouble. Music. I never asked for anything back, not because I didn't need it, but because I believed in giving people room to figure themselves out, especially family. For 3 years, I paid my sister's rent. Not once did I ask her to pay me back. Not once did I even ask where the money was going. Music. I knew she was always between jobs, always almost launching something huge, always one step away from making it big. That's how she sold it anyway. Music. But she never skipped a brunch, a concert, or a much-needed weekend in Miami. I covered her rent, her car insurance, even her utilities when she claimed she was too stressed, music, to deal with bills. I thought maybe this is what older sisters are supposed to do. Maybe if I just held things down a little longer, she'd get there. That's what I kept telling myself. I didn't ask music and expect to end up in the hospital. It started with a toothache that wouldn't go away. Then came the fever. By the time I dragged myself to urgent care, my face was so swollen I couldn't open one eye. They rushed me to the ER. The infection had spread fast. I remember the doctor looking at my chart and saying something I'll never forget. If you'd waited another day, your airway might have closed completely. Music. I was alone when they rolled me into emergency surgery. There was a moment just before they put me under that I panicked. Music. My husband and son had died 5 years earlier in a highway accident. I had no one except my parents and my sister. Music. I texted all 3 of them from the ER, told them what was happening, told them I was scared. Music. Asked them to come. No one answered. 2 hours later, when I woke up groggy and stitched up, I checked my phone. Nothing. Not a single message. Music. Just a missed call from the dentist's office confirming I wouldn't be making my original appointment. The surgeon came by later, Dr. Liza Patel. She sat with me while I tried to eat broth and keep my throat from pulling. I must have looked as bad as I felt because she didn't say much. Just stayed. Music. The next morning I tried calling my sister. Straight to voicemail. Called my mom. Nothing. I texted one more time. This time, music. I didn't ask, I begged. Please come. I'm alone. I need someone. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. A photo from my sister. Music. Her grinning, holding a margarita in the backyard. A grill smoking behind her. Music. Our dad turning steaks. My mom in sunglasses. No caption. No response to my texts. Just that. I stared at the photo for a long time. Then I turned off my phone. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't do anything. But something changed in me that day. Something hard and permanent. I was done. 2 days later, when I finally turned my phone back on, it exploded. Not literally, but close. Music. 26 missed calls. 42 texts, 4 voicemails, all from the same 3 people, and every single one came too late. I guess silence has a way of shaking people more than screaming ever could. After I turned off my phone, I didn't check anything for 2 full days. No updates, no calls, no social media, music, nothing. Just the steady beeping of hospital machines and the occasional visit from Dr. Patel, who had become the closest thing I had to human comfort. Music. When I finally powered my phone back on, I almost dropped it. It lit up like it was possessed. Calls, voicemails, frantic, music, texts, and then one message from my sister that said, "Why aren't you answering? What's going on?" As if she'd forgotten where I was. As if she hadn't been sent a text with the words emergency surgery and alone. I sat there just reading every single one. My mom had called me 8 times in music, 1 hour. My sister left a voicemail I'll never forget. She was crying or pretending to. Said she felt so bad and didn't realize how serious it was. Claimed she was about to come when she saw my last text, but didn't want to ruin dinner. Music. My father, who rarely texted at all, wrote only, "You could have told us it was life-threatening. You should have made that clearer." Music. It was never an apology, just excuses dressed up as concern. They thought I was ghosting them. My sister even said, "Are you mad at me for the party?" Come on, Alyssa, don't be dramatic. Music. She called it a party. Meanwhile, I still had a drain in my neck from where the abscess had been lanced. Music. I was on 4 antibiotics strong enough to blur my vision. I couldn't swallow solid food, and they thought I was being dramatic. When I was discharged, Dr. Patel personally wheeled me out, said her shift was over and she'd rather drive me home than let me Uber alone. She asked if I had someone coming. Music. I lied and said yes. She didn't buy it. On the ride home, I told her the truth about my family, about my sister, about everything I'd given her over the years. Music. I don't know why I told her. Maybe because she was the only one who actually showed up. She pulled up to my place, helped me inside, and then asked if I had music food. I didn't. She left and came back 20 minutes later with soup and crackers. Music. Then she sat down at my kitchen table like we'd known each other for years and asked me one question. Why do music you still give them so much? I couldn't answer. That night I lay in bed and listened to music, the silence. I realized I didn't miss them. I missed who I thought they were. I missed the fantasy version of a sister who'd show up when it mattered, music of parents who wouldn't blame me for not making things clearer. By the next morning, I'd made a decision. No music, more money. No more rent payments. No more rescues. If they wanted to treat me like I was disposable, I'd show them what disappearing really looked like. I opened my banking app and canceled the automatic transfer that had been paying my sister's rent. She didn't know it yet, but her free ride was about to hit a wall. The first rent payment she missed wasn't a shock to her, at least not music publicly. I got a text on the 5th of the month that just said, "Hey, did something happen with the transfer?" Music, I didn't respond. 2 days later. "I'm getting late notices. Can you check your bank?" Still nothing from me. Then came the call. I watched music, it ring, let it go to voicemail. Then another, this time from my mom. Then my music dad. I knew exactly what was happening. For the first time in 3 years, my sister had to look at a bill and realize it wasn't going to magically disappear. I waited for the voicemail. It came around 9:00 p.m., and this one wasn't music calm. She was furious. Said she relied on that money. Said it was unfair to cut her off without warning. She accused me of abandoning her in the middle of her grind, music phase, like she was some aspiring mogul, instead of a grown woman who hadn't held a job longer than 6 months. I still didn't respond. Music. By mid-month, she was posting cryptic things on social media. Memes about fake family, passive-aggressive quotes about leveling up without help, and those god-awful boss babe captions under mirror selfies and outfits I probably paid for. I knew what was coming next before it happened. She tried to guilt me publicly, music. Left a comment under one of my photos, an old picture of my son that said, "Wish people remembered how to care about others like they used to." She was trying to draw blood. I blocked her. That's when it escalated. My mom called livid. Music. Said my sister was having a breakdown and didn't deserve to be treated like garbage. My dad left me a voicemail that said, "This music isn't the way we raised you. Family is everything." Funny, because I remembered being in a hospital bed with a tube in my throat completely alone. I remembered how much everything hurt then. Dr. Patel still checked in every few days, music sometimes by text. Sometimes she'd swing by with groceries on her way somewhere, music, even if she clearly wasn't. One night she brought over her dog, just showed up at my door, and said he likes to visit people who've been through hell. We sat on the floor eating cheap music ice cream. I laughed for the first time in weeks. Meanwhile, my sister's world started unraveling. Music. Her lease ended, and she couldn't afford to renew it. She couch surfed for a while, then moved into a basement apartment with someone she called a music friend, but who apparently charged her rent by the week. She got a job at a cafe working double shifts and hating every minute. I found out because she posted a selfie in the back room with the caption, "This is what y'all wanted, right? Music." I didn't comment, just saved it. I wasn't looking for revenge. Not music yet. But I wasn't about to look away either because I had a feeling this wasn't the bottom yet. Not for her. By the time my sister hit month 3 without my help, her messages shifted tone. The fury was gone. Now it was desperation disguised as humility. "Hey, I know things got weird. I'm just trying to make it right." Then a few days later, "I'm applying for something big. Could really use help just this once. I'll pay you back, I promise." I didn't reply. Not because I was trying to punish her, but because I had nothing left to give. Not after everything. And the truth, I didn't believe a word she said anymore. But the surprise I wasn't expecting came from Dr. Patel. It started with a short conversation in my kitchen. I'd mentioned I'd been looking for work again, something remote, flexible. Music. Recovering had wiped out my savings, and the last thing I wanted was to get tangled up in some soul-sucking job with office birthdays and fake smiles. She said she might know someone. Music. I assumed she meant a friend, maybe a small clinic or an admin role. What I didn't know was that she had just launched her own private surgical consulting group. It was new small, but already making waves in the regional hospital network. Music. She offered me a position directly, said I could work remotely part-time, good pay. She'd teach me everything I needed. I didn't even know what to say in music, and then she said something that caught me completely off guard. "You're not just someone I helped, Alyssa. You're someone I trust. I wouldn't offer this if I didn't think you were worth it." For a long time I'd been invisible. Useful but invisible to my family. I was a resource, a credit card with a name, music. But in that moment, sitting across from a woman who had literally held my life in her hands, I finally, music, felt seen. That same week, my sister sent another text. This time she asked for something I never thought she'd stoop to. She wanted me to co-sign a loan. Music. Said it was for a business idea. Said I was the only one with good enough credit to make it happen. I stared at that message for a long time. Music. And then I did something I never imagined. I typed out a single sentence and hit send. Music. "You'll need to ask someone else. I'm not your safety net anymore." 3 minutes later, my mom called. Music. And when I didn't answer, she left a voicemail that made something inside me go still. "Your sister's music crying. She's at our house. She said you're turning your back on her during the hardest time of her life. After everything you've done to help her now, you abandon her. What kind of person does that music?" That was the moment I realized something truly awful. They didn't care that I almost died. Music. They didn't care that I'd spent years paying her way. All they cared about was the collapse, the inconvenience of watching their golden child fall music apart. And they were angry at me for stepping out of the way. But I wasn't angry. Music. I was done. I didn't respond to my mother's voicemail. I didn't call back. I didn't text, not even to music, defend myself. By then I had already moved on in my head. My body was still recovering, but mentally I'd stopped being the version of myself who bent backward to keep the family from unraveling. Music. I had stitched myself back together with silence, and it was holding. Then came the group text. My mom added me to a thread with her, my dad, and my sister. No greeting, no warning, just straight into it. "This has gone on long enough. We need to talk like adults." I didn't respond. My sister jumped in with something that would have wrecked me a few months earlier. "I can't believe you do this to me after everything I've been through. I'm working 16 hours a day and still barely making rent. You just left me to drown. That's not what family does." And then my dad, the one who rarely said much. "Alyssa, we didn't raise you to be this cruel." That one hit differently because it was the first time I realized they'd never actually seen me. Not for who I was, only for what I gave. And the second music stopped giving, I was suddenly cruel. That night I called Dr. Patel. I asked if she'd ever cut ties with family before. Music. There was a pause. Then she said yes. That it wasn't easy, but it was sometimes the only path to peace. I didn't tell her I was thinking about doing the same. I think music already knew. But here's the part no one saw coming. 1 week later, I got a letter. Music. A real one. In the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. It was from my sister. 4 pages front and back. It wasn't an apology. Music. It was a list. Every time she thought I made her feel small, every time she sensed judgment when I helped her, every time I didn't pick up her calls fast enough, every so-called moment of abandonment she believed I'd inflicted. And then the line that really sealed it: "You act like you're better than me just because you suffered more." That one knocked the air out of my lungs, because I never wore my grief like a badge. I never used my husband's death or losing my son as leverage. Music. I just kept moving because there was no other option. But to her, my loss wasn't pain. It was currency. I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, slid it into the drawer next to the rest of the unpaid bills she used to send me. Then I blocked her number. Music. Blocked my parents too. I changed my email. I gave Dr. Patel my new number and told her she was the only one I wanted to have it. Music. And just like that, I disappeared from their world. No warning, no dramatic goodbye, just silence. Life didn't fall apart after I walked away. That was my biggest fear. I thought that if I cut off my family, something inside me would unravel. Music. That I'd regret it, that I'd miss them, that I'd come crawling back. None of that music happened. The silence that followed wasn't cold or painful. It was quiet, like a door finally closed behind me. Music. After years of screaming through the crack, hoping someone on the other side would listen. Music. They never did, and when I stopped trying, I realized I'd never been the one making the noise. At first, music kept expecting something. A forwarded email, a birthday card from my mother, like she used to send with fake cheerful stickers and no real words. A voicemail from my dad saying he didn't want to pick sides, but I should be the bigger person. But it never came. No one came. And weirdly, it felt good. Not in a bitter, music way, in a clean, quiet way. Like finally getting the cast off your leg after months of hobbling. You realize you're still sore, still stiff, but you can move. And it's your own weight you're carrying now, no one else's. Dr. Patel Liza by then became the closest thing I had to family. It happened slowly. She introduced me to her people. They welcomed me without asking about my past. They didn't want explanations. They didn't expect anything from me except my presence. One evening, a few of us sat on her porch, passing around wine and laughing over a story someone told about burning toast so badly, the fire alarm called the fire department. Someone nudged me and said jokingly, "You're too quiet. You're the smart one, huh?" I laughed, really laughed. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living again. Music. I was becoming someone I hadn't seen in a long time. Someone full, whole, not trying to fix everyone, music else. But the final surprise came months later. A letter, handwritten, thick envelope. I almost didn't open it. Music. It was from my sister. It wasn't an apology. It was a confession. She wrote that she didn't realize how much I had been doing for her until she had to do everything alone, that she resented me not because I hurt her, but because I stopped allowing her to hurt me, that she didn't expect forgiveness. She just wanted me to know she finally understood. And then she said the one thing I never thought she would. "I don't think I deserve to be your sister anymore." Music. I read that sentence twice, then a third time. And you know what? She was right. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. It wasn't about punishing her. Music. It wasn't about revenge. It was about finally understanding that I could love someone once deeply fully and still walk away when they showed me who they were. Music. I moved a few months after that. Different city, new apartment. My job with Liza's company had grown. I was working full-time managing a team. I had dinners to go to, a weekly hike with someone who used to be just a coworker, but was slowly becoming more than that. Music. And one night, sitting on my own couch under a soft blanket with no one demanding anything from me, I smiled. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying anyone. Music. I was just me. And it was enough. I texted the family group chat flight, lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up? I had just buried my wife overseas. My brother replied, "We're busy. Try Uber." My mom added, "Why didn't you plan better?" I simply wrote, "No worries." What they saw in the news that night made them drop their phones. The morning air in Rome carried the scent of rain and marble dust. I stood alone at Lauren's grave, watching groundskeepers lower the casket into Italian soil far from the country she'd called home. 27 years of marriage reduced to a rectangle of polished mahogany disappearing beneath foreign earth. The embassy officials had been kind, but detached processing paperwork for the sudden heart failure that took her while we toured the Colosseum. 3 days earlier, she'd been laughing at my terrible pronunciation of Cacio e Pepe. Then she'd collapsed on ancient stones, and nothing I did brought her back. My phone buzzed as I walked away from the cemetery. The family group chat notification felt intrusive against my grief. I'd sent a simple message the night before explaining that Lauren's service had concluded and my flight would arrive at 5 hours in the afternoon the following day. I asked if anyone could meet me at the airport. The response from my brother came first. "We're busy. Try Uber." My mother followed minutes later. "Why didn't you plan better?" I stared at the screen in the back of the taxi taking me to the airport. 36 hours without sleep. A wife buried thousands of miles from home. And this was what my family offered. My younger sister offered nothing helpful, just a passive heart emoji that felt more dismissive than supportive. My father, who'd been copied on the thread, remained silent in the chat. I typed a response with trembling fingers. "No worries." The flight back stretched endlessly. I couldn't sleep despite the exhaustion pulling at every muscle. Grief sat in my chest like a stone, making each breath feel deliberate and difficult. Lauren's empty seat beside me seemed impossibly vast. We'd taken this trip to celebrate our anniversary, a journey she'd planned for months, with meticulous attention to hotels and restaurants and historical sites. The folder in my carry-on still held her handwritten itinerary notes about where to find the best gelato and which museums offered the most compelling Renaissance collections. My brother's message kept circling through my mind. "We're busy." As if collecting your widowed sister from the airport after burying her spouse required too much effort. My mother's text felt even worse somehow, that casual dismissal wrapped in criticism. Why didn't you plan better? What planning prevented sudden death? What foresight stopped a healthy woman's heart from simply ceasing to beat while surrounded by tourists taking selfies? The plane touched down 3 minutes ahead of schedule. I collected my luggage mechanically, moving through customs with my passport and death certificate and international shipping documents for Lauren's belongings. Everything felt distant and unreal. The airport bustled with reunions and departures, families embracing and couples kissing, and children running toward grandparents with outstretched arms. I walked past all of it carrying a single suitcase and a lifetime of memories that would never expand again. Outside the terminal, I requested a car service, not Uber, despite my brother's suggestion, a proper black sedan with a professional driver who wouldn't attempt conversation. I gave him an address that wasn't my home. My phone rang as we merged onto the highway. My father's name appeared on the screen. Unlike his silence in the group chat, he apparently had thoughts now that required a phone call. I declined it. He tried again. I declined again. A text arrived. "Your mother is worried. Call me back." I typed quickly. "At a friend's house. Need some time alone." That much was true. The address I'd provided belonged to someone who'd been more family to me than my actual relatives for the past decade. Lauren's best friend from college, a woman named Patricia, who'd built a career in investigative journalism and maintained connections that would make most people uncomfortable. We'd had dinner at her place 2 months before the Italy trip, and she'd pulled me aside while Lauren helped her husband in the kitchen. "If you ever need anything," Patricia had said quietly, and I mean anything that requires discretion or resources beyond normal channels, "you call me directly." I hadn't understood the offer then. I understood it perfectly as the car pulled up to her brownstone in a neighborhood my family would never visit. Patricia opened the door before I could knock. Her expression held the kind of sympathy that came from genuine friendship rather than social obligation. She wrapped me in a brief hug that asked nothing and offered everything. "I saw your message," she said, leading me inside. "I'm so sorry about Lauren." Her husband Thomas appeared with coffee. Their home smelled like old books and fresh bread, comfortable and lived in without being cluttered. I sank into their sofa and felt the tension in my shoulders release slightly. "Tell me what you need," Patricia said. So I did. I explained the messages from my family, the casual cruelty of their responses to my grief, the years of small dismissals and larger betrayals that had built a wall between us. My family has always treated me like an afterthought, I said finally. But this feels different. This feels unforgivable. Patricia nodded slowly. What would you like to do about it? I'd been thinking about that question since I typed "no worries" in response to my mother's criticism. An idea had formed during the transatlantic flight, something that felt both perfectly justified and slightly dangerous. I outlined it carefully while Patricia took notes on her phone. That's bold, she said when I finished. Also completely lethal and absolutely devastating. Can you help? I can do better than help. I can make sure the execution is flawless. We spent the next 3 hours planning. Patricia's connections included a producer at the local news station who owed her several favors from a previous investigation. Thomas, who worked in public relations, understood exactly how to craft a narrative that would generate maximum impact. Together, they helped me transform grief and anger into a strategy that would expose my family's true character to everyone who knew them. The foundation of this plan was simple. I would announce something publicly that would force my family to respond, something that revealed both their nature and their priorities. Patricia's producer friend agreed to cover the story as a human interest piece, the kind of segment that aired during the evening news when viewership peaked. The timing would be symbolic. 6:30 in the evening, approximately when my family would be settling in for dinner, comfortable and unaware of what was coming. I spent that night at Patricia's house, sleeping in their guest room, beneath a quilt Lauren had helped Patricia pick out years earlier. Grief ambushed me in waves, moments of forgetting, followed by crushing remembrance. But beneath the sorrow ran something else now, a thread of purpose that gave me a reason to get out of bed. The following morning, the news station occupied a modern building downtown with glass walls and bright lights. I arrived at noon for prep meetings and makeup and a review of what I'd say on camera. The producer, a sharp woman named Yolanda, explained the segment structure while her assistant adjusted the lighting. We'll frame this as a story about generosity and community support in the face of tragedy, Yolanda said. The contrast will speak for itself. The interview itself lasted 20 minutes, though they'd edited it down to 4 for broadcast. I sat in a comfortable chair and spoke clearly about Lauren's death, about burying her alone in Italy, about returning home to face grief without my partner. Then I explained what I'd decided to do with the life insurance payout that had arrived faster than expected due to the circumstances of Lauren's death abroad. Lauren and I never had children, I told the camera. We always said we'd leave our resources to causes that mattered. The life insurance company has already begun processing the claim, and I've committed to donating $2 million to the Children's Hospital, where my wife volunteered every Saturday for 15 years. They'll use it to expand the cardiac care unit, which feels appropriate given how Lauren died. Yolanda asked the question we'd prepared. That's incredibly generous. I understand you just returned from Italy yesterday. How are you managing with such a significant loss? I smiled sadly. I'm managing alone, which has been harder than expected. My family wasn't available to support me when I arrived home, but the staff at the hospital has been wonderful. They're helping me arrange a memorial service for Lauren, and they've shown me more compassion in 2 days than I've received from anyone else. The interview continued with details about Lauren's volunteer work, her impact on families who'd spent terrifying weeks in the pediatric cardiac unit, the children who'd drawn pictures for her, and the parents who'd cried when they heard about her passing. I shared stories that revealed her character, her boundless capacity for empathy, her ability to make sick children laugh during their darkest moments. Yolanda leaned forward slightly, her expression gentle but curious. Can you tell us about a specific moment that captures who Lauren was? I smiled despite the tears threatening to surface. There was a little boy named Marcus, 7 years old, waiting for a heart transplant. He'd been in the hospital for 3 months, and he was terrified of everything. Needles, doctors, even the sound of the monitoring equipment. Lauren started visiting him every Saturday, and she'd bring these ridiculous hand puppets. She'd make up stories about brave knights and dragons, but the dragons were always just misunderstood and needed friends. The memory felt vivid and painful. Marcus started asking for her specifically. He'd refuse certain procedures until Lauren arrived because she made him feel safe. When his transplant finally happened, successful and life-changing, his parents asked Lauren to be there when he woke up. She was the first face he saw. He's 11 now, healthy and thriving. His mother sent me a message after Lauren died, saying that Marcus cried for days. He'd made her a birthday card 6 months in advance because he wanted to make sure she got it, even if he wasn't around. Yolanda's eyes glistened. That's beautiful and heartbreaking. Lauren touched hundreds of families like that, I said. She remembered every child's name, their favorite colors, what made them smile. She showed up consistently week after week, year after year. That's who she was, fundamentally someone who understood that presence was the greatest gift you could offer another person. Lauren believed in showing up, I said near the end. She believed that presence mattered, that being there for people when they needed you was the foundation of all meaningful relationships. I'm grateful to the hospital staff for showing up for her legacy when others chose not to show up for me. The segment would air that evening at 6:30. Patricia confirmed this via text while I was still at the station. She'd also taken the liberty of ensuring my family would be watching. Her methods remained mysterious, but I trusted her completely. I spent the afternoon beginning preliminary paperwork with the hospital's development office. The donation commitment was real and binding, the largest pledge they'd received in their 70-year history. They explained the process would take several weeks to finalize, fully involving legal review and gift agreements, but they were already planning a press release and a naming ceremony for the expanded unit. Lauren's name would live on in a place that mattered, helping children long after her own heart had stopped beating. Patricia had stopped by my empty house earlier that day, packing a bag with clothes and essentials that now sat in her guest room. The practicalities of grief required someone thinking clearly, and I was grateful she'd anticipated needs I hadn't even considered yet. My phone remained silent until 6:15, then it erupted. My mother called first. I let it go to voicemail. My brother tried immediately after. Voicemail again. My sister sent a text. We need to talk right now. I silenced my phone and turned on the television in Patricia's living room. She sat beside me with Thomas on her other side, all of us watching the local news like it was the finale of a particularly dramatic series. The anchor introduced my segment at 6:28. A local woman has made an extraordinary donation to Children's Memorial Hospital following a personal tragedy. Our own Yolanda Martinez spoke with her earlier today. The screen cut to me in the interview chair. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman hollowed out by grief, trying to find meaning in loss. My voice stayed steady as I explained about Lauren, about Italy, about the life insurance and the volunteer work, and the decision to honor her memory through generosity. When I mentioned returning home alone because my family hadn't been available, the camera caught something in my expression. Not anger exactly, more like resigned disappointment, the look of someone who'd expected nothing and received exactly that. My phone started ringing again before the segment finished. Patricia turned it face down on the coffee table. "Let them wait," she said. The reaction online was immediate and overwhelming. Patricia tracked it on her laptop, showing me the flood of comments on the news station's social media pages. Strangers praised the donation and questioned what kind of family abandoned the woman who just buried her spouse. My mother's Facebook page, which she'd never quite figured out how to make private, filled with comments from people she knew asking why she hadn't picked up her daughter from the airport. Within an hour, the hospital's main phone line was flooded with calls, some from people wanting to make their own donations in Lauren's honor, others from families sharing their own stories of how Lauren had helped them through impossible circumstances. The development director, the same woman I'd met with earlier that afternoon, called me personally. Her voice was thick with emotion as she explained that they'd received $43,000 in spontaneous donations just since the broadcast ended. People are writing checks in Lauren's name, she said. They're sharing stories about family members who've been through cardiac emergencies. One woman drove to the hospital at 7 to drop off a $5,000 cashier's check because she said her grandson is alive because of this unit, and Lauren held her hand during the worst night of her life. I sat there absorbing the magnitude of what had unfolded. This wasn't just about my family anymore, though. Their absence remained the catalyst. This had become something larger, a communal acknowledgement of Lauren's impact and a collective response to genuine compassion meeting indifferent cruelty. Thomas showed me his phone where a Reddit thread about the news story had gained traction. Thousands of comments from people sharing their own experiences with unsupportive family members during grief. The validation I was receiving came not just from strangers judging my relatives, but from people who recognized their own pain reflected in my experience. One comment in particular struck me. This woman lost her spouse and her family in the same week, one to death and the others to their true nature. But look at what she's building from that loss. That's not revenge, that's transformation. My brother's employer, a law firm that traded heavily on its image of compassionate service, received several messages expressing disappointment that one of their partners would leave his widowed sister stranded. His LinkedIn profile accumulated comments overnight. The hospital's press release went out at 7, including quotes from grateful families and details about how the expanded cardiac unit would save lives. Local media picked up the story immediately. By 8 o'clock, 3 different news outlets had requested follow-up interviews. My sister appeared at Patricia's door at 8:30. I watched through the window as she rang the bell repeatedly, finally giving up when Thomas answered and politely explained that I wasn't accepting visitors. Through the glass, I could see her face, clearly not apologetic or concerned, but angry. Her jaw was set in that particular way that meant she felt wronged somehow, that she'd come here expecting cooperation and found boundaries instead. She gestured emphatically while speaking to Thomas, her voice rising enough that I caught fragments through the glass. "This is ridiculous. Her own sister making us look terrible." Thomas remained calm, his body language polite but immovable. When she finally left, he came back inside and shook his head slowly. "She wanted me to convince you to post a retraction," he said. "She insisted that you'd misrepresented the situation and that their messages had been taken out of context." Patricia snorted. "Out of context. Try Uber has exactly one context. She also said something about how you're embarrassing the family and that your mother is receiving harassment online. She seemed to think you'd orchestrated this deliberately to damage their reputation." I felt a bitter laugh escape. I told the truth about a donation I was making. I answered a question honestly about my support system. Everything else is just consequences. But my sister's reaction told me something important. They still didn't understand what they'd done wrong. In their minds, the problem wasn't their behavior, but my decision to make that behavior visible. They were upset about exposure, not action. Embarrassment over cruelty was somehow worse than the cruelty itself. The voicemails accumulated throughout the evening. My mother's voice shifted from concerned to irritated to desperate across 6 messages. "People are saying terrible things about us online. You need to post something explaining that we had important commitments. Call me immediately." My brother's message was focused on damage control. "This is affecting my reputation at work. We need to discuss how you're going to fix this situation." My father characteristically said little. His single message was brief. "Your mother is very upset. Please come home so we can talk about this as a family." I sat on Patricia's sofa and felt nothing but a cold satisfaction. They weren't concerned about my grief. They weren't ashamed of their behavior. They were embarrassed by the public exposure of their selfishness, worried about how they appeared to neighbors and colleagues and distant acquaintances who'd seen the news. The following morning brought more interview requests and a call from the hospital asking if I'd be willing to speak at a fundraising gala they were planning. Lauren's favorite flowers arrived at Patricia's house from people I barely knew, accompanied by cards expressing sympathy and admiration for the donation. My family's messages continued growing increasingly frantic. My sister showed up twice more. My mother apparently went to my actual house and stood on the porch calling my name until a neighbor asked if everything was all right. I let them stew for 3 days. 3 days during which the story spread beyond local news to regional outlets and then national attention. A human interest piece about grief and generosity and the isolation of loss. Several articles mentioned in passing that I'd arrived home from burying my wife to find my family unavailable, a detail that sparked thousands of comments about toxic family dynamics and the loneliness of modern life. During those 3 days, I stayed with Patricia and Thomas processing grief in an environment that felt safe and judgment-free. We established a routine that helped anchor me. Morning coffee on their back porch, watching birds at the feeder Lauren had given them as a housewarming gift years earlier. Afternoon walks through their neighborhood where people recognized me from the news but respected my space. Evening meals where we talked about Lauren's life rather than her death, sharing memories that celebrated rather than mourned. Patricia's contacts kept her updated on the ripple effects spreading through my family's social circles. My mother's garden club had an emergency meeting, ostensibly about spring plantings, but actually about whether to distance themselves from a member facing such public scrutiny. My brother's law partners held a closed-door session discussing how his personal controversies might affect client relationships. My sister discovered that 3 of her closest friends had blocked her on social media after she posted a defensive explanation that only made things worse. Your sister wrote that she'd had a prior commitment that prevented her from picking you up. Patricia told me reading from her phone. Someone responded asking what commitment could possibly be more important than supporting a grieving family member. Your sister said it was a hair appointment she'd scheduled 6 weeks in advance. The absurdity of that defense seemed to encapsulate everything. A hair appointment. That was what had prevented my sister from showing basic human decency during my darkest hour. And she posted this publicly, apparently believing it justified her absence. On the 4th day, I finally responded to my father's messages, not with a call, but with a text. I'll meet you at the coffee shop on Meridian Street tomorrow at 10 Cherry. He arrived 15 minutes early. I came exactly on time, walking through the door to find him sitting at a corner table with nervous hands wrapped around a paper cup. He stood when he saw me, uncertainty written across his face. "Thank you for meeting me," he said quietly. I sat down without ordering anything. "You have 30 minutes. He blinked at the bluntness, but didn't argue. Instead, he launched into what was clearly a prepared speech about misunderstandings and poor timing and the stress his wife had been under recently. I let him talk for 5 minutes before holding up one hand. "Stop. I don't want excuses." "Then what do you want?" "I want you to understand what you did. I buried my wife alone in a foreign country. I flew home with her death certificate in my carry-on. I asked my family for one simple thing, and you all made it clear that your time was more valuable than my grief." My father's face reddened. "Your brother had a work commitment." "He's a lawyer, not a surgeon. His work commitment wasn't saving lives." And Mom's excuse was even worse. She implied I was inconveniencing her by not planning better for my wife's sudden death. She didn't mean it that way. Then how did she mean it? Because from where I'm sitting, there's only one way to interpret telling your newly widowed daughter that she should have planned better. Silence settled between us. My father looked older than I remembered, exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. For a brief moment, I felt something like sympathy. Then I remembered standing alone at Lauren's grave, and the feeling evaporated. "The news coverage has been difficult for your mother," he said finally. "I imagine it has. She wants to apologize. She's welcome to do that. I won't stop her." "But will you accept it?" I considered the question honestly. Would an apology change anything? Would words of regret erase the memory of their casual dismissal when I needed them most? "I don't know," I admitted. "Right now I can't imagine what she could say that would matter. She showed me who she is. You all did." My father winced. "We made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But we're still your family. Family shows up. That's what Lauren taught me. That's what she demonstrated every single day of our marriage. And every Saturday she spent at the hospital making sick children smile. Family doesn't text 'try Uber' when you've just buried your spouse." "What do you want from us?" The question hung in the air between us. "What do you want from us?" my father asked again. I considered it carefully. What did I want? An apology felt insufficient. Money was irrelevant after the insurance payout. Public groveling might be satisfying, but ultimately empty. "I want you to think about the kind of people you've become," I said slowly. "I want you to ask yourselves when comfort became more important than compassion. I want you to consider how you'll feel if something happens to one of you and the others decide they're too busy to show up." My father's eyes glistened. "That's harsh." "So is telling your daughter to take an Uber from the airport after she buried her wife." He had no response to that. We sat in uncomfortable silence until I stood to leave. "I need space," I told him. "Tell Mom and my siblings to stop calling and texting. When I'm ready to talk, I'll reach out. If that day never comes, then you'll have your answer about the consequences of your choices." I left him sitting alone at the table, the same way they'd left me alone at the airport, and felt the symmetry was appropriate. The news cycle eventually moved on, as news cycles always do. But the story had staying power in ways I hadn't anticipated. The hospital named the new cardiac wing the Lauren Bennett Memorial Unit, and the dedication ceremony drew coverage from medical journals and healthcare publications. Parents whose children had been saved by the expanded facility sent letters describing Lauren's impact, sharing stories of her kindness during their darkest hours. My family's social reputation in their community took longer to recover. My mother stopped attending her book club after too many pointed questions about family values. My brother's law firm suggested he take a temporary leave from client-facing work until the public attention faded. My sister, who'd always coasted on superficial charm, found her friend group suddenly less available for the brunches and shopping trips that had filled her calendar. Patricia helped me navigate the ongoing media attention with grace. I did select follow-up interviews, always focusing on Lauren's legacy and the importance of the hospital's work. I never mentioned my family directly again, but I didn't need to. The original story had provided enough context that people drew their own conclusions. 6 weeks after the initial broadcast, my mother appeared at Patricia's house unannounced. Thomas texted me from the porch, asking if I wanted to see her. I considered refusing, then decided that avoidance served no purpose. She looked diminished, somehow smaller than I remembered. Grief had marked her differently than it marked me, writing shame across features that had always projected confidence. "I owe you an apology," she said before I could speak, a real one without excuses. I gestured to the porch chairs. We sat while spring rain began falling on the street, creating a curtain of noise that made the conversation feel private despite the public setting. "I was cruel," my mother continued. "I prioritized my own convenience over your pain, and there's no justification for that. I told myself I was frustrated about timing, about disruptions to my schedule. But the truth is that I became selfish comfortable. I forgot what it means to sacrifice for the people you love." The apology sounded rehearsed, but genuine. I let her finish without interrupting. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I don't think I deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I understand what I did. I understand that when you needed your mother most, I failed you completely." Rain pattered against the porch roof. Somewhere down the street, children laughed despite the weather. "Why did you come here?" I asked. "Because hiding behind phone calls felt cowardly. Because you deserve to hear this face to face." "Did Dad send you?" "No. This was my decision, though he supports it. We all do." I thought about Lauren, about how she'd approach difficult conversations with directness and compassion. She would have appreciated my mother's willingness to sit in discomfort rather than taking the easier path of avoidance. "I appreciate you coming," I said carefully, "but I'm not ready to resume regular family contact. What happened revealed something fundamental about our relationships, and I need time to decide what I want those relationships to look like going forward." My mother nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "That's fair. More than fair. If you're serious about change, then change," I continued. "Show up for other people. Be present for your family and friends when they need you. Not just when it's convenient. Maybe someday I'll see evidence that you've become someone different. And if I do, if I change, then maybe we'll rebuild something, but it won't be what we had before. That relationship is gone the same way Lauren is gone. If we create something new, it will be on different terms." She left shortly after walking to her car through the rain without an umbrella. I watched her go and felt the complexity of my emotions. Anger hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something more nuanced. Disappointment mixed with faint hope. Grief combined with the possibility of eventual healing. The hospital's fundraising gala occurred 2 months later. I wore the dress Lauren had helped me pick out for a different occasion, navy blue with subtle embroidery that reminded me of her careful attention to detail. The event raised an additional $300,000 for pediatric cardiac care, pushing the total impact of Lauren's memory beyond anything we could have imagined. During my speech at the gala, I talked about presence and compassion and the ripple effects of showing up for people during their hardest moments. I mentioned the hospital staff who'd supported me through grief, the volunteers who'd stepped forward to continue Lauren's work, the families who'd transformed their own tragedies into motivation to help others. I didn't mention my biological family at all. But I spoke extensively about the family we build through choice, the people who demonstrate through action rather than obligation that they belong in our lives. My mother attended the gala sitting near the back with my father. They left immediately after my speech without approaching me, respecting the boundaries I'd established. That restraint felt like the beginning of understanding, though I knew the path forward would be long and uncertain. Patricia found me after the event, pulling me aside while servers cleared dessert plates and guests filtered toward the exit. "Lauren would be proud of you," she said simply. The words cracked something open in my chest. I'd been holding myself together so carefully, maintaining composure through interviews and ceremonies and endless administrative tasks associated with death and its aftermath. But Patricia's observation reached past all the armor I'd constructed. "I miss her," I whispered, "every single day." "I know, we all do. Sometimes I'm angry at her for dying, for leaving me to navigate this alone." "That's normal," Patricia said. "Grief isn't rational. And sometimes I'm grateful that what happened with my family occurred after she died. She never had to see how they treated me. She never had to know that her faith in people showing up for each other wasn't universal." Patricia hugged me, then a fierce embrace that asked for nothing and offered everything. When we separated, she handed me an envelope. "From Thomas and me," she said, "for the next phase." Inside was a travel itinerary, a return trip to Italy this time, with companions who'd promised to help me say a proper goodbye to Lauren in the place where she'd left this world. Patricia and Thomas had arranged everything down to reservations at the restaurant where Lauren and I had planned to celebrate our anniversary before cardiac failure erased all our remaining plans. "You don't have to accept," Patricia said, "but we wanted you to know the option exists when you're ready." I held the envelope carefully, feeling the weight of their thoughtfulness. This was what family looked like. This was what showing up meant. 3 months later, I stood at Lauren's grave in Rome with Patricia and Thomas beside me. The cemetery looked different in summer light, less stark and more peaceful. I brought seeds from Lauren's favorite flowers petals that would bloom each spring in soil that held her physical form while her memory flourished elsewhere. We stayed in Italy for a week, visiting the places Lauren had circled on her handwritten itinerary. I ate the recommended gelato and explored the museums she'd researched and stood in the Colosseum where she'd collapsed. Each location held pain, but also connection, a way of honoring what we'd shared by experiencing what she'd hoped we'd discover together. On the last day, I received a text from my father. Just a photo, nothing else. It showed my mother volunteering at a food bank, sorting donations with obvious exhaustion written across her face. The image was dated and time-stamped, proof of presence rather than performance. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I pocketed my phone and walked through Roman streets with people who'd earned their place in my life through consistent action rather than biological accident. Whatever future relationship might exist with my family of origin would unfold slowly, built on evidence rather than assumption. The news story about my donation eventually faded into archive footage and old headlines, but the Lauren Bennett Memorial Cardiac Unit continued saving children's lives, and that mattered more than any temporary media attention. Parents still sent letters describing how the expanded facilities had given their families hope, how the equipment purchased with donation money had caught dangerous conditions early enough to prevent tragedy. I kept those letters in a box beneath my bed, reading them on difficult nights when grief felt overwhelming. Each story reminded me that showing up mattered, that presence had power, that choosing compassion over convenience created ripples extending far beyond any single moment. My family learned that lesson the hard way, through public exposure of their priorities and private reckoning with who they'd become. Whether the lessons stuck remained uncertain, but at least they'd been forced to look honestly at themselves in ways that comfort and routine had previously prevented. As for me, I learned that revenge sometimes looked like transparency, that the most devastating payback involved simply revealing truths without embellishment or exaggeration. My family's own words and actions had told the story. I'd merely provided the platform for others to witness what had always existed beneath the surface of our relationships. Lauren would have appreciated the elegance of that approach. She'd always believed that character revealed itself through behavior rather than proclamation. In that sense, the news coverage had simply accelerated what would have eventually become clear through accumulated small betrayals and convenient absences. I moved forward carrying her memory and her lessons, building a life that honored presence and compassion and the courage to show up when showing up felt difficult. Some days were easier than others. Some mornings I woke forgetting she was gone, reaching across an empty bed before remembering. But slowly, gradually, the weight of grief shifted into something I could carry without being crushed by it. The family I chose stood beside me through all of it. Patricia and Thomas, the hospital staff, the volunteers who'd worked alongside Lauren and now worked in her memory. They formed a constellation of support that proved biology mattered less than intention when it came to the relationships that sustained us through life's hardest passages. My mother continued sending photos of her volunteer work. My father called monthly asking nothing and offering simple updates about his life. My brother sent a formal apology letter 6 months after the initial incident, acknowledging his failure without making excuses. My sister remained silent longest, finally reaching out a year later with an invitation to coffee that I politely declined. Forgiveness. I was learning wasn't a single decision, but an ongoing process. Some days I felt generous enough to imagine eventual reconciliation. Other days, the memory of their casual cruelty felt as fresh as the moment I'd read those texts from the Rome airport. Lauren's absence remained the constant backdrop to everything, but gradually her presence manifested in different ways in the cardiac unit bearing her name, in the volunteers she'd inspired, in my own commitment to showing up for people when they needed support rather than when it felt convenient. That commitment became my revenge and my healing, the way I transformed their betrayal into purpose. They taught me, through negative example, what mattered most. I built a life that honored the opposite of their choices, and that life became the truest payback imaginable. The news coverage had been satisfying. The public exposure of their selfishness had carried poetic justice. But the real victory was quieter and more profound. It lived in the children whose lives were saved by expanded cardiac care, and the families who found hope where previously only fear existed, in the daily choice to meet grief with generosity rather than bitterness. Lauren would have been proud. Patricia confirmed this regularly, and I chose to believe her. Whatever came next, whether eventual family reconciliation or permanent distance, I would navigate it guided by the principles Lauren had embodied. Show up. Be present. Choose compassion even when comfort beckoned. That was the legacy worth building. That was the revenge worth taking. Not cruelty returned for cruelty received, but rather transformation of pain into purpose, betrayal into meaning, absence into enduring presence. The rest was just details.